Good morning, everyone, and welcome to University Unitarian Church in Seattle, Washington. It's Sunday, March 14th, 2021. My name is Jon Luopa. I'm the senior minister here, and I'm here this morning with my colleague, Beth Chronister, our musicians, and our tech crew. Today marks exactly 1 year since we have been virtual streaming the services due to the COVID pandemic. It's hard to believe that we've not been in the building as a worshiping congregation for a whole year. Sometimes it seems like a lot more or a lot less, but here we are nonetheless. I hope you had an opportunity to look at the gateway this past Friday, where we had updated information about our plans for re-entering some space here in the building carefully and along with guidelines and protocols, and we will continue to update that as decisions get made. But please do know that the staff and leadership of the congregation are ever mindful of your frustration and your need to be back together as a beloved community. Let us begin the service this morning with the ringing of the bell.
I call us to worship this morning with these familiar words. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know, once again, that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and in miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Welcome to worship this morning. Welcome to University Unitarian Church. From wherever you are, it is good to be together. Throughout this month, as part of our giving campaign, there will be videos each week that are highlighting different ministries of this congregation. And on this morning, we'll be watching a video about UU the Vote. And so this past year, over 120 members of UUC participated in some way in this effort. UU the Vote, which was an initiative of the Unitarian Universalist Association to promote civic engagement and voter participation nationwide. Early in our involvement, UUC members requested an opportunity to support UUs and citizens generally in some other state where voter suppression has been particularly problematic. Steve Carlson, who led up the UU the Vote effort at UUC, reached out to UU minister Reverend Lisa Garcia Sampson of North Carolina, who was leading the effort in that state. And so a wonderful connection was made, including some 13 weeks of joint phone banking with other UUs and record-breaking voter participation in North Carolina in the past election. So let's take a listen to that story.
Hello, friends. There are so very many reasons and ways that I love this UUC community. Today, I want to tell you about just one, the opportunity to work for a more just world while building relationships with others. Many of us had that opportunity this last year through UU the Vote. Recently, a few of us gathered to reflect on the work and the relationship building with new friends in North Carolina.
I remember you and Jock and Corinne and Jerome, and I remember everyone showing up and being so overwhelmed by that presence of University Unitarian, and thinking like, I thought it was really powerful. I remember, Steve, you said, I really just want to say out loud that I really appreciate this. I think this is really great work, and I'll be back next time.
There were so many people who said to me from our church, you know, I was excited to do this. Of course, I want to do democracy work. I'm fired up about that. Sure, let's do this thing with North Carolina. And then they were like, oh, I had to come back because of the community. I mean, there was just kind of this grace, I guess, in the way that you kind of held us, but I suppose we kind of held each other.
Yes, you did. Yeah, we all did. But the way people celebrated one another, and that kind of like when one of us has a win, we all win, and you know, and the successes are greater, and the challenges and the failures are lightened by our doing it together. And you know, your congregation, you know, obviously was just, I just don't have the words to say how anchoring your congregation's presence for 13 straight weeks.
What kind of memories do you guys have from the time together?
And her daughter was just so enthusiastic, like, I am driving my mother, and then just named off like 4 other family members that we're going to be taking, and we definitely have to vote.
One was a young man who was, I think, about 19 or something and hadn't voted before. He was pretty committed by the end of the conversation. So that was, and since he was a young voter, I felt particularly good because it could set his pattern for life. So that was probably one of my most heartwarming ones. Yeah.
And it was this woman, Alberta. Turns out she was in her 80s. Here's this woman who has been doing this for so long, and she still has the grace to thank me.
And we really had to talk about being nonpartisan, that our calls were nonpartisan, and really what that meant. And why I wasn't encouraging him to vote a certain way, but I was encouraging him to vote, what the process was. And he was really like, that's really cool. Okay, yeah, that's really cool. And that idea of maybe it got him thinking, you know, we're not always trying to pull people in a certain direction. We're trying to help people exercise their own voice.
It maybe just does like a little tiny bit to reinstill a little bit of trust in humanity, that we're just trying to make sure that we just believe in democracy. We glimpsed the best of our faith this year. I just so deeply feel that. What we are capable of contributing to movement. Like we haven't even scratched the surface. A lot of those things that actually led to this record-breaking participation in North Carolina are going to expire.
That a big part of what we hope to see through something like HR1 is sort of this: what's good for the pandemic should be good all the time.
I have made phone calls forever, in person and from home, for many, many decades. And the experience with UUC was probably the very best experience I've ever had.
I could say one more thing, y'all. Maybe you don't understand the sense of energy that this brought to our state, but I think we had more people from North Carolina come on to this phone bank because 6 or 7 weeks in, they finally joined and felt what it was that we were creating together. And so you really breathe life into the organizing community in our state as well. And so, and including Chapel Hill showing up after you shaved your head, Steve, and then Marion dyed her hair purple, and the rest is history. So thank you for when you showing your care for our state, and that you had our backs. It really helped our folks to mobilize as well. So stay, and I'm just so grateful to all of you for that we co-created something really special, and something that is going to keep evolving into the future.
Would you please join now in singing our doxology, followed by hymn number 10, Immortal Love.
Dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise, let peace, goodwill on earth be sung through every land, by every tongue.
On the second Sunday of each month, we share our offering plate with an organization doing good works in the wider community. And on this morning, we will be sharing our plate with Chief Seattle Club. And I'm excited to share with you this video about what it is that they have been doing in Seattle for now over 50 years.
We know that there are 80,000 urban Native people who live in King County. That means there is an urban Native experience that is happening all the time. And we are so excited at Chief Seattle Club to always be profiling and lifting up the voice of urban Native people, especially those urban Native people who are experiencing homelessness.
We have built systems over the years that fundamentally are unfair and disproportionately impact some of the most vulnerable people in our city.
The disparity that our people are facing on a daily basis could be soul-crushing, and to know that there's a place like the Chief Seattle Club where you can go there and see your family, see your relatives, see your people who are there to help you from the standpoint of an Indigenous person, that lifts our communities up, that lifts an individual spirit up to say that you're not alone in this.
Chief Seattle Club is a place where everybody feels comfortable, everybody feels like they can get what they need and or help others and make an impact. And it's just a really centering place, I think, for this extremely diverse neighborhood that we have here in Pioneer Square.
We believe that every Native person who's out there experiencing homelessness right now should be brought into stability, should be brought into community, should be brought into a place of love. And we can't wait to see what will happen with them once they get in those spaces.
There's a lot of development projects in the works, in the plans. Another 10, 20 years, this city's going to look totally different.
I am excited about opening the Soto Village, and I am excited about breaking ground on the project that's going to be right here in this neighborhood. Right now we have a huge opportunity to make that space better, to make it a Native space, to tie it into the new development that Chief Seattle Club is leading.
We think of downtown as really everybody's neighborhood, it's everybody's community, and the club plays such an important role of helping us create an inclusive and equitable neighborhood and an equitable city.
Chief Seattle Club really goes out there and advocates for not just its members, but the betterment of the entire community.
This is a Native city. This is a city that was named after a chief.
Chief Seattle Club is the natural partner to reclaim that land and use it in a way that's functional and healthy for people.
I'm really excited about what Chief Seattle Club is bringing to our Indian city. Their involvement in the community, their involvement in the center of our city in the downtown, enhancing public spaces, bringing more housing, being an active member of the downtown community, and helping us all remember the importance of Seattle's Native community.
I think elevating the voice of people who have historically been ignored is one of the pieces that this organization brings forward every day.
We have a Native presence here. It's no longer just you saying that I recognize that there's a problem here. There's people from the community saying this is what the problem is, and we're coming to you with a solution.
Chief Seattle Club is such an advocate for good policy, but also literally making a difference in the infrastructure that we have to support people.
We're going to fix this from the root cause, from a Native perspective, to make it right for our community. And once that happens, the entire health of our Seattle community will be lifted up as well.
So something I would like to add to the story of Chief Seattle Club is the video really lifts up how its long work and advocacy and housing programs in downtown and around Pioneer Square. But in this last year, they have also started construction on a permanent stable housing for 125 people up in Lake City. And so it will be opening up this next year called Sacred Medicine House. And this is part of the shift in housing and homelessness here in Seattle of how to help people become truly grounded in their own life and have that stability with wraparound services. So thank you. Thank you this morning for supporting their work and supporting this care of Indigenous neighbors and friends and family. Oh my gosh. Did you know it's daylight savings time? Would you please join me in saying the words we say each week? This church is a community of ourselves. Its energy and its resources are our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share. When we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm our lives within it. Would you please join me now in the spirit of prayer and of meditation? Spirit of life and love, that which is imbued within our joy and abides with us in our sorrow. As the long winter nights slowly give way to brighter spring days, we reach the 1-year anniversary of when this pandemic began to sweep the globe, and life as we knew it turned upside down. Take a breath and remember. Remember the compassion and courage of healthcare workers, essential workers, teachers, leaders, and volunteers. The need for all of us to live by the truth of our interdependence and to safeguard the health of both stranger and friend. Remember the many who have died. Here in the U.S. and the world over, the people in your own life who have passed away and those who are grieving. Holding in heart how each life is lost is more than a number, but a person of inherent worth and dignity with a name, a family, a legacy. Recall how grief is born of love, rippling out across a world intertwined. Remember what it was like for life to suddenly change. The ways you adapted and were resilient, the times you crashed and burned, holding all in the gentle embrace of well-deserved compassion for all who have lived within this surreal and traumatic time. Remember from whence help came, the people and the places that received you and held you, the inner strength that you developed or discovered, the challenging and delightful learnings within the uncertainty, the spiritual practices that led you back from the brink. Remember the sacred presence that never broke faith with us and never will. The love that has held us, holds us all, and refuses to let us go. And I lift up thanks for this religious community. How we have cared for one another through these long months, learned new ways to do church, connected across the generations, and shown courage, creativity, and care. We are a community of communities connected by faith and friendship strengthened by intention and led by conviction. A church that we inherit, and one that we will leave for the next generation, come what may. To these words, I invite you to add the silent prayers, longings, and gratitudes of your own hearts. May it be so, and blessed be.
Let me just begin by saying how wonderful it is to have John Carrington, our harpist, back this morning providing instrumental music, and of course Jenny Spence, our soprano soloist. Even though the room is empty of persons, the sound is just truly magnificent, and I know you appreciate it as much as I do. A long-time and very trusted mentor of mine often said that reality was deeper than we can think. Reality is always deeper than any person can think. And yet many people, and I include myself in this, don't seem to have understood that statement at all, thinking that whatever it is we hold to be the truest and the best and the brightest is actually the most real. And if others don't understand it as deeply as we do, then it's our job to convince them. And there's almost a little bit of self-righteousness in that kind of living in the world with an understanding or a conviction or a commitment that we feel is absolutely the truth and that others need to know it, even if they don't know it now. So I'd like to look this morning, in the time that I have, at that experience of human understanding, of trying to make sense of what reality is all about. And I'm going to do it in just a couple of ways, and 3 ways, and let me state them very clearly in the beginning to you. First, I would say that human understanding is absolutely basic to every effort of human nature. That's my first point. And my second point is, of course, as a minister in a church, I believe that religion has a role in influencing our understanding. And lastly, I will try to make the case that not only does it have a role, but religion really ought to have a role in shaping human understanding. So let's start with this. The psychologist Carl Jung once wrote in his journals that a human being cannot stand a meaningless life. We cannot stand a meaningless life. Life has got to make sense for us. This is not an indulgence, and this is not a luxury, and it's not something for the professional thinkers, all of you professors and teachers out there, merely. This is true for every one of us, every single human being. And I would make no exception on this, that every human being, regardless of mental or emotional capacity, must make sense out of life. They must see relationships. They must see what makes sense. They must see how things are tied together. And this, of course, has to do with the nature of the human mind, even if the human mind evolves in stages, both in persons and in populations. And one might even go so far as to say that a being is a human being to the degree that they relate, make connections, create or discover patterns, establish systems and senses at any one time, that it is their mind that is actually receiving those patterns. And we begin to be aware of this in infancy and childhood. Really, from the first day of birth, that organization begins to take place. And death brings that needful effort to a close. The Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset wrote, "The most skeptical of people live amid certain fundamental convictions, live in an interpretation. That society into which we have fallen by the process of being alive already has its own interpretation of life. Its repertory of ideas, of ruling convictions about the universe, and without realizing it, we find ourselves installed in that network of ready-made solutions for the problems of our lives. From the very moment of birth, we are constantly trying to receive and absorb those collective convictions into our veins, almost before we have become aware of the problems for which they are or pretend to be solutions." Close quote. And that is a pretty remarkable final statement in that paragraph. We receive these interpretations and impressions even before we are aware of the problems for which those interpretations were invented in the first place. This, I think, is our desperate, relentless human need to structure the meaning of the world. You don't wait until you become an adult. You don't wait until you have received an advanced degree. You begin to structure and organize meaning to bring it within your ability to handle from the very beginning of your life. And this, I would call, is your understanding. This is your understanding. Incomplete, partial, fallible, erroneous, and truthful. And nevertheless, it is yours. And that basic understanding might be considered a kind of primitive faith, a trust in the reliability and coherence of experience, without which we would not be able to live very well. And as we mature, it is hoped that we will be able to discern how certain patterns have been imposed on us, and we might have the ability and opportunity to determine whether or not we keep or change or challenge those patterns. It cannot be assumed that everyone will recognize that patterns have been imposed on them. Patterns about class and gender and race and religion and ethnicity, these and so many other kinds of things imposed upon us by the dominant culture in which we live. And we don't recognize it because to do so requires a very high degree of sophistication, which in my experience anyway, I'd say most people do not possess. The effort to make a new pattern that will suit you and the world as you understand it can be a very difficult and a very painful task. And yet I believe that religion ought to encourage and nurture such a task. Because when your pattern is shaken, you are shaken. What happens when you suddenly realize that the world is not the way you had figured it out? When your methodology no longer works? When your theory fails to explain what's happening in the world? When your child does something unthinkingly and irrevocably harms their life? When your spouse surprises you with a divorce? Or when you come to understand that you are living in the wrong body, or your privilege, or your power has been exposed, and shame and guilt may flood that understanding. Sometimes it takes weeks or years or a lifetime to reassemble the pieces. And while you are doing that, hopefully while you are doing that, your uncertainty can be a hell. You would do anything to escape. Such a situation can be terrifying to many, many people, and they may refuse to accept as real the very thing that has spoiled their world. Now, I'm guessing that many of you immediately are going and thinking of those who are very different from yourselves, and of course who are terrified and have embraced all kinds of conspiracy theories and other kinds of foolishness, those poor, benighted people. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about you, and I'm talking about me. So, to conclude this first point, understanding is utterly basic to living a meaningful life. We cannot escape the need to understand, to appreciate, to know, and to relate. And I think this is the substance of the religious function in life. To understand, we have to know. And for us, anyway, the religious quest is to know. Secondly, we know in an earlier time, when there was very little scientific knowledge of the world or human nature, religion as a dominant cultural force instituted patterns of understanding. Every aspect of human experience in the natural world had an explanation. I can remember my Swedish grandfather sitting with him on the back porch during a thunderstorm, and his telling me that the lightning and thunder that we heard in the sky was actually the Norse god Thor throwing his hammer in the heavens. Now that's a mythological way of understanding the world, and it charmed me as a boy, and it still does today. But of course, that's not what's happening in the heavens when we hear thunder. Everything used to be prescribed under the aegis of religion, with the mantle and authority of religion thrown in, and you were born into this pattern of structured meaning that held you firmly. But because we live in a hazardous world, there is a danger always in not being held by some pattern of meaning. And the more vulnerable you are, the greater is the danger. Think about that just for a moment. In order to minimize the vulnerability, the religious authorities would fit you into a pattern of understanding, a hierarchy of meaning. And your role in that process was merely to assent, to obey, to accept, even if you didn't understand. Today we follow the same pattern in regards to science, as so many did earlier in regards to religion. It's a strange notion to ponder whether or not some centuries from now, if we are still here, science will have been replaced by some other pattern of meaning in the world, as religion has been replaced. By the late Renaissance in the West, and especially through the developments of Protestant religion, the heretical impulse which had existed in culture from the very earliest of days was given institutional expression during the Reformation. The effort of the individual person to structure meaning, the right of the individual person to establish their own way, the integrity of the individual's understanding was finally opened up in culture. And this is called the heretical impulse, from the Greek meaning of the word heresis, from which we get heretic. A heretic is a person who chooses for himself, for herself, for themselves, despite the interpretations of the dominant culture. Anyone who does this is a heretic. And this approach prevails in the world today, and it is true for those who are still within the traditional religious institutions, as it is for the many who are not. As a minister in a major metropolitan area in the United States, I am confronted every day by the irrelevance or marginality of what institutional or traditional religion means in our contemporary context. Much of traditional religion has become time-worn because it has not respected the utterly basic human need for understanding, and understanding that evolves as we evolve. Religion must adapt to new circumstances because human beings need to understand themselves. At one time we used to say that science helped us explain the how of things. How did this come to be? How did such and such evolve? And religion explained the why. This was first set up in 1959 by C.P. Snow, who talked about the two cultures of knowing, the scientific and the traditional or religious. But I don't think that this distinction holds anymore. Science offers some understanding of how life is possible, how it continues, but it also proffers suggestions as to why there is life in the first place. Have we not come to a point where it is the relationship between religion and science, the how and the why, to see how the culture conditions both of those enterprises. Some years ago, E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, wrote a book called Consilience, where he took on this problem of trying to reconcile the two cultures of science and religion. And yet most of the book was devoted to looking at the vast, unexplored territory between these two poles. Well, finally, how ought religion to help us with this conundrum? I begin with an insight of the developmental psychologist Robert Keegan, who wrote a book with this title, In Over Our Heads, in which he makes the claim that modern and postmodern people, all of us, are really in over our heads. We are exposed to more information, various kinds of understanding, interpretations and theories, more than human beings have ever been before, and our capacity to discern truth and meaning in this variety of theories is really fairly limited. And as a result, it leaves most of us feeling incompetent, inept, unable to cope with the complexities of human life. It's a magnificent book. I recommend it to you, In Over Our Heads. Today there is the necessity of a new way of understanding, the urgent need to understand how the world works is greater now. The traditional patterns that used to hold us are challenged, and more of the burden has been shifted to each one of us, because institutions may teach us that it is virtuous not to understand others, especially those who are different from us. We must not only live from day to day, but understand the how and why of it. And the responsibility for this falls on each one of us. We have to find our way through as soon as we are able. Each one of us has the task of making a whole out of our world, to find patterns and coherence, and to make sense, and to regain again a kind of basic trust. I don't know how capable you are of that wholeness, but the ultimate of understanding would be to see everything in its proper relationship, with all its impact and connective power. Nobody is capable of understanding that alone, but we may be able to understand more of it together when we are able to share with each other our differing perspectives and listen deeply, and putting in abeyance our own convictions and not trying to understand the other person's conviction through the lens of our own, but trying to disarm ourselves sufficiently to be exposed to the beauty and the power and the insight of those who are different from ourselves. That sounds like a wonderful idea, doesn't it? And yet it's a very difficult one, and it can be a very painful one. Let's not forget that reality is always an ongoing conversation between complexity and clarity. We can always pursue more understanding of the relationships and their meaning, their coherence, so that we can deal with life with some degree of sanity, so that it isn't incongruous, so that it isn't destructive, so that we are not bumping into each other and hurting each other or in conflict with ourselves. Shouldn't that be a religious task? I ask it because I think religion ought to be the quest for the good life, for the abundant life, for the equitable life, for the just life. Religion has always provided assurance, and we need to find it in this way now by coming out of ourselves and connecting with each other. And shouldn't it be the purpose of a religious community like this to help you in your quest and in your task, with no final absolute answers to give anymore, but now with honesty and maturity, simply a place where people with whom your understanding is respected, challenged, affirmed, and where you stand with those who are committed to that enterprise. Religion then would no longer be something sentimental or outworn or a luxury or an embarrassment or mere motivated credulity, as one famous atheist put it. Religion would become really a necessity in a way, and religion and understanding might become synonymous. If this was acceptable, we might be able to reclaim a more mature faith, a faith which restores our trust in ourselves, our world, our future, despite the fact that much will always remain unintelligible, despite the fact that tragedy always chastens goodness. Remember, reality is deeper than we can think. That's not to remove the role of reason, but it is to be reasonable with humility and maturity, and to accept that when we start to think that we have the truest explanation of anything, we are going very far from reality indeed. Can we have a faith which takes the risky path of always understanding more and is grateful and confident nevertheless? I would like to think that that is our task here, in this church, in this beloved community, in this time and place with each other. So may it be. Amen. Our closing hymn this morning is hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses.
Of time. passion, give heed to the cry, voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end.
Universalist tradition, and we are preparing to celebrate one of those at the end of April, the last Sunday in April. Justin Almeida, whom we voted as a congregation just last month to ordain to ministry, will be a joyous and a happy experience. I love the tune of the hymn. I love all the words of the hymn, and I close with the second verse this morning. Wake now, our reason, reach out to the new, join with each pilgrim who quests for the true, honor the beauty and the wisdom of time, suffer our own limits, and praise the sublime. May it be so. Have a good week. Amen.